My sister slammed her hand on the conference table, so hard the water glasses rattled. "You're a leech, Harper. You always have been," she snapped. "Dad carried you your whole life. That money belongs to me." The words hung in the air. Sharp. Loud. Final. The lawyer didn't interrupt. The trustee didn't move. Neither did I. "Stick with me." I slowly turned my wrist and glanced at my watch. The small ticking sound felt louder than her voice. 9 minutes left. Meline took my silence as weakness, like she always did. She pushed her chair back and started pacing, heels clicking on the floor. She talked about fairness. About blood. About how Dad paid for my mistakes. And how I didn't deserve a single dollar after what I had done to the family. Her voice rose with every step, full of confidence, like the decision was already made. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Calm on the outside. Tight on the inside. I'd learned that look years ago. The quiet face. The one that survived. Meline didn't notice the trustee's pen stop moving. She didn't notice the lawyer glance at the clock. She didn't notice the faint click when the door behind her unlocked. Just enough to be heard if you were listening closely. She never listened closely. She was too busy telling my story for me. Too busy reminding everyone that I was the sensitive one, the burden, the sister who needed help. The one Dad worried about. The one she claimed to protect. What she didn't say was how silence had been my role since childhood. How staying quiet kept the peace. How swallowing words felt safer than speaking them. I'd believed for a long time that survival meant staying small. Meline stopped pacing and leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "So?" she said, staring straight at me. "Say something. Or is this where you cry and let the adults handle it?" I met her eyes for the first time. Still, I said nothing. Because this meeting was never about defending myself. It was never about money. And it was definitely not about winning an argument with my sister. It was about timing. The trustee cleared his throat. The sound cut through the room, clean and firm. "Before we discuss assets," he said, looking down at the file, "there is an addendum your father insisted be read aloud." Meline frowned. I checked my watch again. Right on time. As the trustee adjusted the papers, my mind drifted, not to a specific year, but to a familiar feeling. The tight one in my chest. The one that always showed up when Meline spoke with confidence and everyone else nodded along. She had always been like this. The one with the strong voice. The one people listened to. When we were kids, adults called her driven and bright. If she spoke sharply, they said she knew what she wanted. If she pushed, they said she was leadership material. When I reacted, they used a different word. Too sensitive. I heard it in the quiet of that conference room, like an echo from our living room growing up. If Meline teased me until I cried, Dad would sigh and tell me to toughen up. If she took something of mine and refused to give it back, he'd say it was easier if I just let it go. Peace mattered more than fairness. Dad was always there, but never really there. He paid for school trips, braces, college. He showed love through checks and bank transfers, not conversations. When things got uncomfortable, he retreated behind work and silence. It was easier to let Meline explain things for both of us. And she did. Constantly. She told people who I was. The fragile one. The needy one. The sister who couldn't handle pressure. Over time, her version became the only one that mattered. I learned quickly that correcting her only made things worse. Arguments stretched on for days. Silence ended them faster. So I adapted. I became the one who apologized first, even when I wasn't wrong. The one who stayed quiet at dinner. The one who smiled when Meline spoke over me and pretended not to notice. I told myself it was survival. I told myself it didn't hurt. But it did. Every small moment stacked up. Every time Dad defended her without asking what really happened. Every time I was told to be grateful instead of honest. Resentment didn't arrive all at once. It grew quietly, like a crack spreading under pressure. Across the table, Meline cleared her throat, annoyed by the pause. She hated waiting. She hated not being in control. I watched her, still calm, still certain the story would end the way it always had. With her on top. She didn't know that the silence she'd trained me into was no longer fear. It was patience. And the seeds planted long before money existed were finally ready to surface, whether she liked it or not. The last year of my father's life didn't arrive loudly. There were no big family meetings or dramatic announcements. His health faded in small ways that were easy to ignore if you wanted to. Shorter breaths. Longer naps. Missed calls that used to be returned right away. Meline noticed first. Or at least, she claimed she did. She stepped in like it was natural. She handled doctor appointments, spoke to nurses, managed insurance, and took control of his finances to help. Every update came through her, filtered and softened. When I asked questions, she smiled tightly and said, "I've got it covered." Anytime I pushed, her tone changed. "You'll just complicate things, Harper," she said once, like she was being kind. "Dad doesn't need stress right now." So I stayed on the outside. I got updates late, if at all. I wasn't copied on emails. I wasn't told when medications changed or when home care was adjusted. If I showed up unexpectedly, Meline acted surprised, like I'd broken a rule no one had explained. But little things started to feel wrong. Bills didn't match the care Dad was getting. Charges appeared for services I never saw. A nurse he liked was suddenly gone, replaced without explanation. When I asked about it, Meline brushed it off. "Admin stuff," she said. "Boring." It didn't feel boring. One afternoon, I found Dad alone in the living room, the house quiet in a way that felt heavy. Meline had stepped out. He looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a blanket even though it wasn't cold. He asked me to sit. Our conversations became careful after that. Short. Private. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked questions that circled the truth without touching it. He wanted to know what I was seeing, what I thought, whether I felt shut out too. I answered honestly, but gently. I could tell he was weighing things, connecting dots he'd ignored for too long. One evening, as I stood to leave, he held my hand longer than usual. His grip was weak but steady. "If I'm gone," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor, "will you be okay telling the truth?" The question settled between us. Not angry, not dramatic, just heavy. I nodded, even though my chest felt tight. At the time, I thought he was asking about grief, about memories. I didn't understand yet that he was asking about consequences. The truth didn't come all at once. It slipped out in pieces, the way lies usually do. A receipt left on the kitchen counter. A care schedule that didn't match the charges. A nurse quietly mentioning hours that were never worked. I sat at the table one afternoon and lined everything up. Bills. Statements. Notes I'd kept without knowing why. The numbers didn't add up. Money meant for my father's care had been moved, redirected, thinned out until the services around him barely matched what was being paid for. When I asked Dad about it, he looked away. He admitted it slowly. He knew something was wrong. He had felt it. But every time he tried to question Meline, she told him it would turn into a fight. He was tired. He was sick. He didn't want his last months to be filled with arguments between his daughters. So he endured it quietly. That was the moment something in me cracked. I didn't go to Meline right away. I waited until I could speak without shaking. When I finally confronted her, it was just the two of us in the hallway, late at night, the house dim and still. I showed her the paperwork. I asked her to explain. She laughed. Not loudly, just enough to sting. She told me I was confused, that I didn't understand how these things worked, that I was imagining problems because I was emotional. When I didn't back down, her voice hardened. She stepped closer. "No one will believe you," she said. "You're nothing without me." The words landed hard, familiar and cruel. She reminded me that she handled everything, that she spoke to the doctors, that she controlled the money, that I was the unreliable one, the sensitive one, the sister people pitted, not trusted. Then she smiled and told me to drop it if I cared about Dad's peace. I walked away without raising my voice, without crying, without defending myself. That was the last time I fought her openly. Instead, I started writing things down. Dates, times, amounts, who said what and when. I copied statements. I saved emails. I asked quiet questions and listened carefully to the answers. I stopped trying to convince anyone. I stopped trying to be heard. Because I finally understood something important. Meline didn't fear confrontation. She feared proof. And I had no intention of warning her ever again. My father didn't confront Meline the way most people would expect. There was no shouting match. No dramatic demand. He had spent too many years avoiding conflict to suddenly change at the end. But he did start paying attention. He asked for copies of statements. He asked to approve changes to his care. He listened more than he spoke. And when answers didn't line up, he stopped asking Meline altogether. Instead, he made a call she didn't know about. He reached out to a trustee who had no connection to our family. No history. No loyalty to either daughter. Someone who worked in facts, not feelings. The kind of person Meline couldn't charm or intimidate. My father didn't tell me right away. When he finally did, it wasn't framed as a confession. It was practical. I need this handled cleanly, he said. No fights. No guessing. Together, we reviewed documents. Not to argue, but to understand. He saw the patterns clearly once he allowed himself to look. The redirections. The missing care. The control disguised as help. He rewrote his estate with conditions attached. Not punishments. Requirements. Full transparency. Independent review. Automatic pauses if anything didn't meet the terms. Then he recorded a letter. Not a goodbye. Not an apology. Just his voice, steady and calm, explaining his reasoning. He named facts. He explained decisions. He made it clear this wasn't about love or favoritism. It was about responsibility. When I realized I wasn't listed as the main beneficiary, I was surprised. He noticed my reaction and shook his head. This isn't about giving you money, he said. It's about giving you authority. He named me executor of compliance. The one who ensured conditions were met. The one who would trigger audits if needed. The one who couldn't touch the funds, but could stop them cold. I asked him if he was sure. He looked tired but certain. You're the only one who will tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. That was his last decision as a father. Not generosity. Not forgiveness. Accountability. And for the first time, I understood that trust didn't always come in the form of comfort. Sometimes it came in the weight of responsibility, placed carefully in the hands of the one person who wouldn't abuse it. The trustee's voice pulled me back into the room. The hum of the lights. The heavy table. Meline still standing like she owned the place. She crossed her arms and let out a short laugh as the addendum was introduced. This is unnecessary, she said, shaking her head. Dad trusted me. We can move on. The trustee didn't look up. He began reading. At first, the words sounded harmless. Formal. Dry. Dates. Definitions. Meline tapped her fingers against the table, bored, confident. She leaned back in her chair like someone waiting for paperwork to end. Then the language changed. Terms tightened. Sentences sharpened. Every word felt deliberate. Conditions. Reviews. Independent verification. Automatic holds. Meline's smile faded slowly, like it was being erased in real time. She tried to interrupt. The trustee raised a hand without even looking at her and kept going. The lawyer beside him flipped a page, calm and practiced. The room felt smaller. I watched Meline's eyes move faster as she tried to follow along. She laughed again, this time louder, forced. This is standard stuff, she said, glancing at me. You're really letting him scare you with this? But her foot had started tapping. The trustee read on. Any deviation from outlined care procedures would trigger review. Any undocumented transfers would pause distribution. Failure to comply would freeze all assets until resolved. That was when she stiffened. Her hands dropped to the table. Her mouth opened, then closed. The air shifted, like something heavy had been set down between us. This can't be right, she said. There must be a mistake. The trustee finally looked up. There is no mistake. He turned one page. Until all conditions are met, the inheritance is formally paused. The word hung there. Paused. Not taken. Not redistributed. Locked. Waiting. Meline stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly across the floor. You can't do that, she snapped. I was handling everything. Ask anyone. The trustee nodded once. We will. I stayed seated. This wasn't the moment for words. It was the moment for process. For the system my father had built quietly, knowing exactly who would push against it first. Meline looked around the room like it would side with her. The lawyer stayed neutral. The trustee returned to his papers. No one rushed to reassure her. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the story. And as the addendum continued, line by line, I felt something settle inside me. Not joy. Not victory. Certainty. Because the meeting she thought was about collecting money had just become about proving truth. The trustee put down his pen and adjusted his glasses, scanning the room. He cleared his throat and started reading the specific conditions of the addendum. Meline leaned forward, eager, expecting praise or at least recognition. Instead, she got rules. Real rules she hadn't anticipated. Every financial decision she had made regarding Dad's care had to be accounted for. Every transfer. Every payment. Every change. The documents she thought were private were now subject to review. The words were clear, precise, and automatic. No wiggle room. The trustee paused on one section. An independent audit will be triggered immediately, he said. All relevant records will be examined without exception. I could see her face change. The initial laugh she tried to force disappeared. Her confident posture shrank into something tighter, like she was trying to make herself smaller. Wait, she said, her voice cracking. This is unnecessary. I did everything right. Everyone knows that. According to these terms, the trustee continued evenly. Any trust funds are now frozen until full compliance is confirmed. Her eyes darted around the room. She looked at the lawyer. She looked at me. No reassurance came. She realized no one could bypass the rules her father had put in place. I remained calm, hands folded, heart steady. For years, I had watched her act as though she owned every room she entered. For the first time, she didn't own this one. And, the trustee added, Harper Caldwell will serve as executor of compliance. She will ensure that all conditions are met before any distribution occurs. Her reaction was instant. Her face went pale, then red. You can't do that. I handled everything. You're giving her control over me? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The room went quiet except for the soft sound of papers shifting. Madeline's rage had begun to twist into panic. This wasn't about money, she realized in that moment. The inheritance wasn't just paused. Her actions were now exposed, traceable, undeniable. She opened her mouth to argue, but words failed her. Every threat she had wielded over the years had no weight here. The power she thought she held was gone. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the table. Her carefully crafted image, the one she had built by controlling everyone around her, was crumbling. I stayed seated, watching patient. This was never about the money. It was about truth. And now, the conditions made sure that truth would be seen, documented, and accounted for. For the first time, she couldn't rewrite the story. Madeline's face twisted as the trustee finished reading the conditions. She slammed her palms on the table, making the papers jump. This is insane, she shouted. You're both against me. Harper, you've been manipulating everything behind my back. Her voice bounced off the walls, loud and accusing, but it lacked the control she usually carried so effortlessly. The room went quiet except for her yelling. People glanced at each other, unsure where to look, but no one moved to agree with her. I handled everything for Dad, she continued, voice rising. And you're saying I've done something wrong? That I betrayed the family? I stayed calm, silent, letting her words hang in the air. I had learned long ago that reacting would only give her power. This time, her words were empty because the proof was already in the room. The trustee set down his pen and opened another folder. He flipped through pages methodically and looked up at her. Meline Caldwell, he said, voice steady. Here are the documented transactions and authorizations. Every payment, every adjustment, every transfer has been recorded. He placed the documents on the table. I could see the look on her face change as she tried to read fast, scanning the numbers, the dates, the signatures. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then flicked toward the lawyer, hoping for an ally. There was none. The dates matched. Transfers matched. Authorizations matched. Every action she had taken was now traceable, undeniable, and legally recorded. Her confident image, the one she had built over years of controlling the story at home, of keeping people afraid of contradicting her, started to crack. Her voice, once loud and certain, faltered. Her gestures became sharp, panicked, uneven. You can't do this. None of this matters, she shouted, but the words sounded hollow. The room no longer belonged to her. The table, the chairs, even the walls seemed to close in around her, exposing her as the one who had tried to hide the truth. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle. The trustee didn't argue. He just presented the facts. The lawyer didn't interrupt. Everyone could see it clearly. Madeline's collapse was complete in real time. The anger, the fear, the threats, all of it melted away under the weight of undeniable evidence. For the first time, she was no longer the one in control. The meeting wasn't about her anymore. It was about what had been done, what could be proven, and the accountability she had spent years avoiding. And I was finally free to watch, quietly, as the truth claimed its place. After the meeting, the consequences started almost immediately. Meline had triggered more than she realized. The independent audit continued on its own schedule, and every irregularity she had tried to hide was now under review. Banks, lawyers, and care providers all began their part quietly, methodically, without anyone needing to raise a hand. Family members started to pull back. Those who had once whispered in her favor or nodded along silently now kept their distance. Conversations that once included her name or her opinions became neutral or skipped her entirely. Her friends and extended family didn't confront her, but they no longer defended her. She was isolated, slowly realizing that the control she once had was gone. I didn't gain any sudden wealth. The inheritance wasn't handed to me in a neat package, and I didn't need it to feel victory. What I gained was something deeper. Agency. Control. A sense that, for the first time, I had power not through anger, not through manipulation, but simply through truth and persistence. I walked away from that meeting with my head held high. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I didn't make speeches about fairness or justice. I let the process, the legal framework my father had left, do the work for me. Meline would face the exposure, the pause, the audit. I had nothing to prove beyond what was already shown. The quiet revenge was more satisfying than any argument could have been. I didn't need to yell for people to see the truth. The facts spoke louder than any accusation she could make. Every document, every date, every signature told the story of her manipulation and my father's careful foresight. I spent the days afterward organizing files, responding to questions from the trustee, and making sure nothing slipped through unnoticed. Each small action reinforced the control I had earned, not from money, but from the ability to protect the truth, to make sure it could not be twisted. I thought about Dad often. He had given me a role that mattered, a responsibility that required integrity, and a trust that could not be bought or stolen. That was more valuable than the inheritance itself. Meline's face lingered in my memory from that day. The tension, the panic, the disbelief. But I didn't focus on her. I focused on what I could do. I focused on being steady, calm, and honest. And when I finally left the office, the quiet weight of the day on my shoulders, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free, strong, and certain that I had finally reclaimed the narrative of my life, without cruelty, without chaos, just truth. Sitting in my apartment days after everything had settled, I finally let myself breathe. The inheritance meeting, the audits, the tension, it all felt like it had been part of someone else's life. But I knew it wasn't. It was mine, and I had lived through it fully, every sharp word, every calculated pause, every reveal of truth. I thought about the money. Not once did it feel like the most important part. Dad's careful planning, the trustee's reading, the conditions, they weren't about giving me cash. They were about making sure what had been hidden could no longer be hidden. What mattered was being seen, being acknowledged, being trusted to carry out responsibility even when it was difficult. That recognition was worth more than any account balance could ever be. Meline had lost everything she thought she controlled. Her authority, her image, her certainty gone. Friends and family no longer supported her blindly. Her threats and manipulations no longer held sway. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to celebrate. The truth, quietly and clearly, had done what I never could have done by shouting or arguing. Watching her panic, seeing her grasp at control only to find it gone, was a quiet kind of justice. I still had my father's final letter. I read it often. It was concise, precise, and firm. No emotional flourishes. Just facts, instructions, and the trust he placed in me. Holding that letter felt like holding a piece of him. I didn't need anyone else's approval to understand the depth of that trust, or the lessons he had quietly passed on. It struck me how different life could have been if I had chased revenge openly, if I had sought to humiliate or embarrass Meline. But that wasn't who I was, and it wasn't what Dad wanted. The inheritance had been more than money. It had been the chance to act with integrity, to witness truth, and to honor the life of someone who trusted me completely. I smiled softly as I thought of the first words she had thrown at me during that meeting. "You're a leech." I wasn't. I never had been. I had been patient. I had been careful. I had been observant. I had been the witness. And in that quiet certainty, I finally felt whole. This story shows the power of patience, truth, and careful documentation when facing manipulation or family disputes. Always keep records, understand legal processes, and act with integrity. Learn to protect yourself and your rights calmly. Sometimes quiet action and accountability are stronger than anger or revenge.